Hello, everyone. This is Linda Westfall from the Software Excellence Academy, powered by the Westfall team. Tom Gilb is our speaker today. I'm always happy when Tom is talking for us. He's one of my favorite people and one of my gurus from back in the day. I've learned so much. I always enjoy and learn from his webinars. And today he's going to be talking to us on stakeholder values-driven project management. And with that, I'm going to make Tom the presenter here.
Okay, thank you, Linda, and a pleasure to be here. And hello, all old friends, and hello, hopefully, some new friends. You'll notice the QR in the upper left-hand side if you want a quick copy of the slides. They are detailed with lots of freebies, free books and things like that, and so you might want to have a copy. That will be there on the last slide at the end too. So on we go. I've got far too many slides and far too much in them, but I'm going to get through all the slides by the hour, I hope. And what I don't have time for, you will, if you're interested, have time to go back and study or discuss with me or whatever. Here is the ultimate simplification of my talk. Quantify, critical, stakeholder, values. Then move towards those value goals frequently until done. That's it. That's the whole lecture. What I found is people don't quantify. They don't focus on what is really critical. They don't look at stakeholders. They look at users and customers only. And they don't look at the values. They look at functions and designs and other things. So total violation for most of what's out there of methods and practices on just the first sentence. So at the bottom, how many of your projects actually do this today? Surprise me. Tell me your case study. Show me evidence. But I'm unhappy with what I find out there. Now, a lot of people would tell you to go for value and value streams. There's a lot of talk about it. But when I look at these lectures, I discover that the how to do it, for example, how to quantify any stakeholder value, isn't there. And they don't do it. And they make rough assumptions like value is how much money you earn or something like that. So my focus has always been on the practical how to do it. And you're going to find a lot of practical how to do things in this lecture. I hope some of you will tell me a year from now, yep, I started using this and that and it worked, or maybe it didn't, but we'll see. Okay. Now, I use terminology in my own way, as everybody does, free country. And I've got some perhaps surprising definitions of the key words here: value, project, and management. So by value, I don't mean financials only, far from it. I mean the critical things that people and organizations need, and in particular, all the abilities and all the qualities keep that. In other words, usability, security, safety, for example. Project, not the simple beginning and end of an effort, but for me, it's a continuous idea of moving towards delivering the necessary values. And management, well, there's a long list at the bottom there, some of it conventional in ideas of management, some of it not so conventional, but that's, when I say management, I mean manage those things. Let me introduce you to the Gilb management cycle, also known as EVO. You can think of it as an extension of Deming's Plan, Do, Study, Act. And you'll see this frequently as we go through the talk. It sort of ties the whole set of sub-methods together to one project management method. If I were to explain that cycle to you in detail, and I will as we go along, it would be this one-pager on the left. This is the EVO cycle, the EVO method, which is an agile method, one of the earliest, but it's very focused on values and quantification and stakeholder and measurement and other strange things. Let me offer you a free textbook on value management which this talk is built from. So it's another way of, and free copy for you and one of your friends. And there is a paid place for it, but I don't want your money. I want your mind. I want your attention. I want your actions to change things and make the world a better place. So free. Conventional methods have some structural faults, which I've written on the left-hand side. The fault is they don't quantify the multiple values and they don't use these as primary ways of doing their project management. That's it. And they do a lot of other stuff, but they're not focused on values. They're not focused on clarity of the values, which I quantification to do. So let me introduce you to a very interesting man, Dane, who has been a professor at Oxford for a long time, Bent Flyvberg. And there's his new book, How Big Things Get Done, which you can think of as a very interesting book on project management. And he does something interesting. He's collected data on 16,000 projects. We'll get back to that later. But he doesn't just spout his personal opinion. He's very data-based, and I like that. We need to learn. And then he has what he calls his iron law of mega projects: over time, over budget, under benefits, over and over again. And that's quite charming. Some of you remember what the British said about the Yanks during the Second World War, but I won't get into that there. He also has some constructive advice on what works, which are A, B, and C here. But it all amounts to, as a joke I can't resist, it all amounts to waterfall method is coming back, at least thorough planning, even when you do it in an agile way. Okay, and long story short, successful project management is based on thorough, deep planning, not on, hey, let's just start coding and have a bit of fun with some sprints and meetings. Forget that. One of the classes he holds is for all the British civil servants that are going to manage major projects in Oxford. And he has his own heuristics, with what I call principles, but he also asked them to develop their own principles. And so here's one from his book. And the principle is, it's the benefits, stupid. Okay, and that's my focus here. I call these benefits, values. And if you deliver the values, people get benefits. And what he's found with his research is that most projects don't even measure benefits. I know that, see that every time. They waffle and bullshit and everything else, but they don't really quantify or measure the benefits. But he says that project managers who do measure and manage benefits perform better than managers who do not. Also in delivering on budget and on time. There's sort of a knock-on effect. If you manage the values, you end up managing the money and the time. That's pretty interesting, okay? They tend to get everything right. In other words, all three factors: benefits, budget, and time. And if you don't focus on the benefits in your project, you will not truly master project management until you do. That's from the book, which I highly recommend. Okay. Now, I just listened to an American talk show host who interviewed Musk recently. He's always interesting. Here is a page from another free gift. It says Musk Methods down there. That's a free book for me, where I have about 107 pages where I've collected the oral culture, you might say, a handbook of the methods that Elon Musk uses in Tesla and SpaceX and other places. It all started when he was wandering around SpaceX with a guy, and he started spouting his 5 principles, which are here. It's starting with requirements and designs, and then starting with getting rid of superfluous stuff. You've all heard it, 60% of everything you code nobody actually uses. And then simplification, optimization, and then accelerating the cycle time, down to maybe several times a day, and automation. He also makes the note that it's important to do these things in sequence. In other words, don't automate the wrong stuff. Another fascinating thing as we dive in and talk about requirements and design is he says that we need to make the requirements less dumb. Nice way of putting it. And it doesn't matter who gave them to you. Your boss, doesn't matter. And he's talking about himself. Even if an intelligent person gives you the requirements, you cannot question them enough. Everyone's wrong, no matter who you are. Everyone's wrong some of the time. That he's including himself there. That's a very humble position for a man like that. Okay, I would maintain that Musk is an example of what might be the world's best value project manager, the way I've defined it. You all know what he's done. You all know how rich he is. Okay. At early stages of Twitter and Tesla and everything else, everybody laughed and said, you're not making a profit and you're doing this and that. But he seems to come out smelling pretty good at the end of the day. I know I have my own money invested in Tesla, and I drive my third Tesla quite happily. May you be so lucky. Okay. Anyway, I offer you 103 pages of me collecting his ideas for project management. And if you do nothing else, take a peek at the book, darn. At least if you want to be as rich as Musk or as unhappy in love as he claims to be, but he's very happy with his work. So here is the whole talk summarized on a page. Now I've got quite a few pages like this, and of course there's no way I can, in the 1 hour talk, tackle all this stuff. So what I've done is I've just picked one thing almost at random, which I'm going to focus on when I get a page of 10 things, and it's up to you to read the others if you're interested. Okay. So I believe that the value delivery process should start by improving existing systems, not building whole new systems from scratch. New technology can emerge in safe increments. That for me is very fundamental, and a lot of people don't think that way, or at least they're not motivated to, because they'd like to sell all the new kit and all the new services for 8 years with an 8-year delay. I'm talking about a Norwegian health system and with no improvements to the existing systems. Doctors are tearing their hair out in Norway in frustration at the idiocy of these large big bang projects that don't work, spend a lot of money. So a section here on value requirements. Here we are in the cycle. We've looked at our stakeholders, and stakeholders have values. So we derive our value requirements from stakeholders, right or wrong, and then we'll prioritize them and do things like that. So if you'd like a little free booklet on how to quantify any soft value, any quality, I give you the Quantier book. Okay. But don't tell me you can't quantify it. Why don't you say, I don't know yet how to quantify it, but Tom said he's got a book I can read to tell me how to do it. Okay. There are no exceptions to my knowledge of a stakeholder value which varies, is more or less, that we can't quantify, and quantification makes things clearer. Here is a very much more extensive book, Value Requirements. That's the free copy for those who want to go into great depth. What is this? A couple hundred pages, 319 pages on the value requirements. And we held an earlier talk about that, so you can pick up the video on it. And the thing about value requirements, in the way I do it, is I pick up a lot more than just the raw requirement, how good we're going to be in the future. I pick up about 20 other things. Okay, so now here's a very simple way of looking at it. As an oval, I have a function, what we do, and values, they're how well we do it. And there are many of these, one for security, one for, safety, etc. And you can have any number of useful values, but of course there's something called too many values, I can't handle it. So I recommend focusing on your top 10. Here's an example of a top 10 values for some COVID planning. And reading down the list, you'll get a better idea of what I mean when I say values. Okay. And these values are connected to the one or more stakeholders that, in fact, sponsor or are interested in or value the values. Okay. Now, user stories you might have thought about. Okay. And I view user story as an elegant, short form which contains three very useful things, which is stakeholder, the design, and the requirement. But the problem is they're often too brief to be useful for anything except making less brief. So here is an example of a user story, which I then proceed to clarify. For example, save me time. What kind of time? Well, average cycle time in minutes for a task done by a user. Okay, what is your wish? How much time do you want to save? 6 minutes. When? And by end of next year. Which task were you talking about? Expert complex task. Who's the user expert? Okay, so what I've done is I've used my planning language, which friend Mike Cohn recommends, in case you wondered, as a way of expanding and clarifying user stories. That's what you can do with them. Here are some simple scales of measure. Scales of measure are no more complex than miles per hour or bits per second idea, but they immediately help you clarify a value idea so that you can use it for project management. That's the main point. Okay. Here's another example. Here's Elon spouting off. Tesla prefers to focus on safety first. What does that mean? Well, I then found myself a scale of measure, average passenger safety rating by the Euro National Car Association, something or other. Okay, and now we have an operational way of measuring what Elon prefers in Europe. Here's another view of the same thing, simple examples. Security, and I held a talk about security recently, which so you can find the video of that at the Westfall site. And I'm shocked that people think security is obviously so important, but they do not quantify degrees of security in their security planning and projects. And I think that should be outlawed. There ought to be a law. You have to quantify security. It's so damn important. Anyway, here's a simple idea of quantifying security. There are far more complex ways of doing it, but we need simplicity here. And here are three levels of security. What we had last year, 10%. What is the minimum by the end of this year, sort of a constraint level, and what is it we really want by the end of the year, 98%. We call that a target level. By the way, you might be interested in another free book, if you can tolerate it, the Success Book, where I state that we need to define success by quantifying values and then work towards it. And then you will get your defined success. Okay, here's another example of a top 10 set of values. This for London air quality planning. These are all quantified. You get some idea again. What do I mean by values? You know, we start with who are the stakeholders, like the mayor of London, and what do they value. And even if we've never ever quantified it before, we quantify it same day. We put a scale of measure on it, and then we start asking, how bad is it now, and how good do we want it to be in the future? And then we have a value requirement. Here, and again, I remind you, I've done a very detailed talk on it, and the recording is at Westfall. Here is a full blast, one of these qualities, the air quality. Here's the scale of measure. Here's the meter, in other words, the test plan, very roughly. And here are various levels. They're more graphical here on that scale of measure, which we reuse. Status being, you know, how bad it is today and tolerable, the minimum we got to get to in certain situations, and the goals and stretch goals being our more ambitious future. And so a typical value requirement in language looks like this and has a lot of interesting information to help you manage your project. Okay, done with that. Part 5, architecture. Okay, here we are. We've done our stakeholders, done our values. Now we can look for the solutions, also known as designs, architectures, strategies, the means to the end. Doesn't matter what you call it. It's how we're going to deliver the values within the constraints like the budget and deadline. And that's where we are here. Now, designs have an awful lot of thingies like issues and risks and impacts and stakeholders and constraints. And I made a long list of these. And I believe that when you're specifying a design, you need to consider and specify in language maybe the whole set of these things for a really costly and large scale strategy. Okay, and the reason for all this is to help us manage costs and risks and priorities and constraints and politics and a whole lot of other stuff. Okay, in other words, we don't just specify the design, we specify all the extra stuff that determines whether we're going to succeed or fail. Okay, so here is very quickly something we're going to look at a few times, but here's an impact estimation table, which takes the top 10 requirements quantified. It then has a set of bright ideas called strategies or designs, modular construction, etc. And then there is an estimate based on knowledge rather than finger waving and random numbers of how good this strategy is for helping us move towards this goal. And what we get is a multi-dimensional understanding of our design or architecture with respect to our values. Okay, and we can then do things like prioritize and, as we'll see in a moment, and make choices and discuss intelligently. So what's happening there is something like this. Here's one of those values from extremely bad to extremely good. Here's where we are on that scale, the status. Here's where we want to get to in time, our goal. Here is a design or strategy, and we ask a simple question, how far is it going to get us? And the answer is about halfway. And I say, that's good. Keep that guy. Hope we can afford it. And by the way, we need some other stuff to get us all the way. So either we revamp this design so it's more powerful, or we find additional or replacement designs to get us there. That's the design process iteration in a nutshell. Okay, here's the same thing with a little bit more information. This represents the design effect level for the design. This is a required level. This is a gap where we know we have to do something or we can't expect to reach our benefit levels or value targets. Okay, so an ideal design or set of designs doesn't break our budget. That's this arrow here. That's the input, the tiger in the tank. And it does reach our goals. Okay, so this is, I'm trying to graphically explain what is design, and I'm simplifying because there are multiple values and there are multiple cost ideas, and that's why we need a table to manage them. Here's a simple language design, a specification. In other words, a lot of lines of information that help us understand what is the design and how does it relate to other things. Here's a simple real example from a healthcare system. This is this is getting pharmaceuticals from inside a hospital system, and these are some of my students who really did a successful project for a healthcare system and told about it. Here are their quantified requirements. Here are some of their major strategies, and here are their evaluations of how they did it, and here is a link to their full case study project. But I picked this because it's nice and simple and small, yet it's absolutely real and successful. Here's another small client of mine. Total number of people in the client when we started, about 65 worldwide. Total number of developers, 16, of which 4 were testers. And they dived in and they hacked a spreadsheet so here's one team of 4 people dealing with 4 different usability qualities or values, which were very, very important for them, and estimating how good their designs were for the 9th iteration and measuring how good it really was, which in fact exceeded their expectations, and keeping track of the cumulative iteration, how good they are. They've exceeded their target by 12.5%. Red means you have a problem, and yellow means, well, you have reached the tolerable level, which is here, but you haven't reached your goal. So this is dynamic management of multiple targets. And by the way, these people always reach their targets, their value targets, their benefits on time. And in fact, they got so good, they wiped out their international competition. They did something else. A little bit later, they had a tremendous, by that time, 10-year accumulation of technical debt, and they were feeling like a dinosaur going to die. And then they said, Tom, guess what we did? We defined the technical debt factors quantitatively. Here's the list here, a lot of testing stuff. And we set some goals. And we used the impact estimation table, and we did an iteration they called the Green Week. 1 week every month, they attacked their technical debt and systematically reduced it. There's an interesting practical idea if you're worried about your technical debt. Same process, but the focus shifts. 3 weeks of user-oriented stuff for the market and 1 week of making the system more amenable to their changes and updates. Here's a little bit more detail on that impact estimation table using a tool called ValPlan. And the detail is that when we estimate these things, we estimate also plus minus uncertainty. We said, what evidence do you have? What is the source of your evidence? How credible is it? In other words, and this is a way of understanding the risk that we have made bad estimates and maybe making bad choices. Detail of that, new little booklet I made. You can have it for free. Value Impact Estimation Table booklet right there. So design to cost. So here are some internet definitions of design to cost. It's a well-known engineering paradigm, but I never hear my IT people talking about it. Here's our friend Bent from Denmark again with his How to Get Big Things Done, and a wonderful little table from his 16,000 big projects. Okay, 47%, 48% of projects were on budget. I guess when they ran out of it, they stopped and didn't complete the project. I don't know. But 8.5% of his projects were within budget and on time, but maybe they didn't deliver the benefits yet. And what he called a minuscule, to use the word, of 0.5% of all these 16,000 projects were on time and on budget, and the benefits, the values, were actually delivered. So how many of you are in that 0.5%? Well, if you are, you don't need to listen to me, but maybe you can teach me how you did it. I'm listening, okay? But very, very, by the way, a large number of the projects here are IT projects, but there are many other classes of projects, such as large skyscraper buildings. And Bent pulls out this guy you've all probably heard of, Frank Gehry, Think Bilbao Museum in Spain. And I like Frank. Here he is. He wants to guarantee that you can build an incredibly sexy system, in this case, his skyscraper in New York, and build it at a price that the owner can afford. And what he does Big Bang waterfall requirements and design and iteration and feedback 70 times in a row before he says, go, build it. Again, we may be looking at perhaps back to waterfall, because agile sure as hell hasn't been a sensational victory for project management. Okay. And he's doing agile. He's just doing it before he actually starts building it, which is what we used to call waterfall. That was the idea. Okay. So he also does other things. He spends a lot of time finding out what the true objective of the client really is, no matter what they tell him to begin with. That's what Musk said too. Got it? Okay. He used a lot of automation, very advanced computer aided design, a large number of iterations to get the design right and get the cost right. Sounds agile to me. And he ends up with a complex building like that, which is built with no changes whatsoever. And that is bloody amazing. No, he doesn't use yellow stickies. Introduce another guy, an old friend of mine, and this is IBM Federal Systems Division, so they're doing space and military stuff. And they spent 10 years developing what is known as the clean room method. And at the end of 10 years, they could say for about 26 very large projects, typically agile deliveries, for example, monthly deliveries for 4 years, that very few of these projects were late or overrun, and none at all in the past 4 years. In other words, they're getting the same kind of project management. This is for software, by the way. They're getting the same kind of project management that Frank Gehry is getting. And they're getting it by being very rigorous in their thinking. Okay, they don't just lash out and code, to put it mildly, and there's a lot of written evidence about that. They're not only using design to cost, which is saying what is the architecture or design which will reduce the cost. They don't say, here's the architecture asked for by the client, how much will it cost? That's a loser. They're saying, here's what we have promised. Here's what the client expects as and can afford to pay, says Gehry. So the question is, can we not only design to cost, but can we at each sprint, each agile cycle, redesign if necessary? And that's exactly what they do. Here's a picture of how they estimate the basic cost rigorously, okay, before they make a bid. But let's just say that bid is within plus minus 10% because they're so rigorous, okay? They collect data on all their projects in historical database, so they're learning from themselves. Here's part of that learning. I met some of the people doing that, Walston and Felix, in my time. They collect 24 pages of data for every project and put it in the database, okay? And that compares to Bent Fleveberg's 16,000 person project database, but IBM didn't have 16,000 projects in there, but they're learning from themselves, okay? And then they go into what really is an early rigorous agile method. I call it agile as it should be, rather than agile as taught by the majority of people teaching agile these days, which is wasted time, as far as I'm concerned. And what they do is, if they discover a deviation in step 23 out of 45 from the cost or the time or the value, they bring in Robert, their architect, and say, Robert, fix it. Change the design so it's cheaper and better, and we'll try it out on the next cycle. And the result is, in the long term, after 45 cycles, that they are delivering the values under budget on time. So maybe we don't have to go back to waterfall model. Maybe waterfall model is necessary for things like skyscrapers, but for software, we clearly can do rigorous engineering agile successfully using the IBM clean room method, design to cost. So I've written down principles of dynamic design to requirements. Focus on one of them. It's faster to adjust to bad design than to figure out the right design to begin with. Very humble, just like Musk. Same thing. Assume it's wrong and try and get less wrong with requirements and design. Notice great people like Gehry, Musk, and Mills and Quinn and think the same type of things. Here are some definitions of various kinds of design to cost. We need to talk a lot more about that. I think it needs to be built into any good form of agile. But some forms of agile, as you know, say they don't even want to know about design. They don't even mention the word, and that's dead wrong. That is a failure path. Okay. Part 7, quality control. Okay, let me introduce you to my favorite client. They have for 20 years and 20,000 engineers adopted my methods corporate-wide and live to talk about it. Here's one guy, he does research on real Intel projects and writes about it. You can get a copy. And what they're doing is they're using my planning language, like I showed you, with quantified scales and things like that. Then they're also using another thing I have in my book, specification quality control, simplified kind of inspection. And what they do is they say, okay, write me some requirements. So here's requirements with 31 pages, and they check it, like, is it ambiguous, unclear, etc., against some standards, which are in the book too. And they find 312, bad things, unclear things in requirement. That's 10 per page. The page is 600 words. And they say, sorry, guys, that far exceeds our necessity of having it cleaned early upstream to start with. Our requirement is actually 50 times better than what you've produced. So go back, read the rules, read the books, remember your 2-day training course on Gilb's methods and try again. And they do, and finally, they get 50 times better than the original requirement delivery. That results in things like the productivity goes up by 233% and the software defects go down by 50%. Pretty nice, huh? Those are my methods in practice as reported publicly by Intel. There's the free copy of the book if you're interested. Okay, you want a paper book, you're going to have to pay the publisher. Okay. Here's a little bit more detailed about the specification quality control process. There's this one thing I wanted to bring out that took me years to understand. You can't just have one quality control or review process. You have to have one process to make sure it's clear and unambiguous. Then you can have another process saying, is it the right stuff? If it's unclear, you cannot decide whether it's the right stuff or not. That took me decades to figure out. Nobody, unfortunately, taught me. I'm teaching you. Okay. Now, part 8, what I always do with my clients, mainly because I'm lazy, I like to spend a week with a client and fly back home and be a lovely Oslo fjord, which I'm actually looking at right now as we talk. But what I do is this. I say, okay, guys, we're going to be together for a week, and I'm going to get you going with my project management ideas. On Monday, we're going to quantify the critical value objectives, and we do. On Tuesday, we're going to draft the top 10 best designs or strategies to reach them, and we do. Wednesday, we build an impact estimation table, like I showed you. 1 page, but it summarizes the relationship of how good these designs are for our critical goals. Thursday, we're going to decompose the designs so they're small enough to do in like weekly sprints. And we're going to find stuff we can do next week to really increase the value levels by a little bit next week for real. In other words, the real system, the real old awful system, is going to get better next week and every week thereafter until we have delivered all the value we want. Okay. By the way, everybody I'm talking to has spent 8 years and they're in a failure mode. They haven't delivered enough value. Friday, we'll talk to the big boss and get approval for this radical new project management week. Okay, here's another view of the same thing. The first week we use this cycle, but we don't actually deliver normally. Sometimes we do. And then every week thereafter, we use this agile cycle, if you like, it's a new kind of sprint, to keep on delivering value. Here's a practical case study, if you think I'm joking. The Persinscom, which is a human resources personnel system for the US Army, which had been going for 8 years, was in deep trouble because General Schwarzkopf said it was crap. It gave him slower response than looking out the window to get information, and it gave him the wrong answer compared to looking at others. He was really pissed off, and they spent all this money on the system. So we did this process. This is what we did on Monday, the quantified requirements. These are 12 people who were working on the system. And then they did their strategy spouting on Tuesday. Then on Wednesday, they spouted these numbers for the rough impact and rough costs. And then on Thursday, they homed in on this big fat number here and started thinking what they could do. And I said, have we got something we can do next week and generate some genuine value on this? And they said, yes. And they said, what is it? And they said, well, we discovered that the reason the general was getting a slow answer was that he was in a queue of 15,000 other Army people accessing the system, and he had to wait his turn. So what are you going to do? Wait a minute, I've got it. You're going to put in one instruction. It says, if general, then move to head of queue, and then he'll get a fast answer. Said, that's right, Tom. I said, could you do that next week? Yes. How do you know? Very skeptically. How can you prove it? And they looked at me and smiled and said, Tom, we did it today. It's done on Thursday. That's how fast you get results. You know, during a week we were not supposed to produce results. They simply produced results. Friday we had a nice meeting with Brigadier General Jack Pellicci from West Point, who said this is the best effing method I've ever seen in my life. And I went to West Point and learned the best methods the US Army has. And then he wrote me a nice certificate that I had saved the whole of the USA forever with my by the way, I volunteered my services. I did not get paid for this. I do volunteer my services to the US Department of Defense. And I've got 10 of these certificates from admirals and generals. Okay, we having fun? Yep. Okay, 10 more minutes. Okay, too many more slides. I'm 40% through this book. I've read one of her previous books, Marina, on the big con, and very interesting if you've been having some fun with the big four and the big three and these other ones. I have a little antidote for it I've had for many years. Here's the free copy, 12 Tough Questions. And here it is. Here's what I literally hand to top managers on the back of my business card. Simple questions like, okay, your IBM Watson will save the world in the health system in Britain. Why isn't your suggested value improvement quantified? It wasn't, and this was a big real scandal dealt with in this book, by the way. Watson, IBM, National Health Service in Britain. So I think it's as simple as we don't even ask the right questions. And the beauty of these questions is that you don't need a long training to understand these are good questions, and you don't have to be an expert to ask the questions either. They're obvious that you as a potential client have the right to ask these questions. Try them out yourself, figure out if they work. Very subtle, low key. Just for fun, I compared my project startup point by point with another popular waste of time called design sprints, and that's enough of that. Part 9, I'm very interested in methods for decomposing big ideas into small ideas, because if we can decompose, we can get value early on a small scale. And if that step doesn't work, we can revert to previous states, things like that. So here are all the good reasons for learning an advanced decomposition methods. Here are some papers and books on how to do my kind of value decomposition. Here's the framework for doing it. And here's part of a video in a book on doing it. And here's what I call the technical options, exactly how we do it. Subject for a separate talk, of course. But I thought I'd throw it at you. I have a very special way of decomposition because I'm dealing with value and cost, not just functionality. So I need and I have a different way of doing it. Same thing with prioritization. It's amazing how many people live in a world like balanced scorecard where they have fixed weights stipulated by unknown people for unknown reasons. And they actually manage some of the largest banks in the world that I've worked with using this bad stuff from Harvard. Anyway, I believe that prioritization has to be done like we human beings do it on a minute by minute basis, integrating a lot of threatening and opportunistic factors and making decisions. In other words, dynamically compute the current prioritization. And this is from the Confirm It example I showed you earlier, how they are computing the prioritization based on their value factors they're delivering. And literally the computation is if it's green, it's not priority, with red, it's high priority, etc. So, you can compute your current prioritization based on the values and costs that you've now quantified, so you have the opportunity to compute prioritization like never before. And here are different steps or options, and we literally take the data from the impact estimation tables and sort the steps automatically. So the queue of steps of sprints being fed into your process is sorted automatically by anything you like. For example, the most values for the least cost would be a smart way of doing it. And that's built into this tool here. Number 11, scalability. Let me just make a long story short here. Here's the detail in a paper. And here is evidence from one of the largest users of my methods, Intel. So this is the man that's behind over 25 years of the use of my methods at Intel for the 20,000 engineers. But when I asked him, do you think my methods scale up? He said, Tom, your methods don't scale up. They are scale free, and we've proven that on large and small projects at Intel. So here are my scale free principles. How do you make things scale free? You don't need safe anymore, people. What you need is scale free. Okay. And here are some management policies at any scale, like don't lock yourself into contracts that you can't get out of go back to the book, The Big Con, to get some idea. I want to say a little bit about parallelity, and I can do it in a very simple way. Here's that Confirm It project. Here are 4 people working on these values concurrently with 4 people working on these values, which are quantified. Okay, here they are. There's the goal level. And concurrently with another 4 people, developers working on these, and 4 that work on these. That's the normal way of working, is concurrent value delivery with parallel teams. So that's just a simple example. This can be done, has been done successfully, and I don't think there's any limit to it. Of course, you have to think about how independent is this one of this one. A little bit of thought goes into that before you can do it, but that's it. We're all done with that one. Part 13, risk management. Again, whole big topic unto itself. I've written a lot about it here and there. I like Warren Buffett, risk comes from not knowing what you're doing, and that's certainly a little problem. 5-minute warning. Okay. And now, if you take the time and trouble to spend the day estimating the impacts of your brilliant ideas or your boss's brilliant ideas on your critical quantified goals, you are reducing the risk that you're going to choose a strategy that gives bad value for large money. In other words, the 99.5% project failure that Bent talks about. Okay, you gotta, we're talking about spending a day of effort to maybe save 8 years of wasted project time. Okay, Don't tell me we don't have the time to do it. Okay? I'm telling you that people who do stuff like this succeed in being on time, under budget, with the right goodies, with the benefits. So enough of that. More about risk, little time to do it, but maybe topic for another thing there. I've been fooling around with a way of simplifying my ideas, and I call it the Penta model. There's a paper on it. There are the values, there are the resources, there are the designs. This is missing from the iron triangle, people. Okay, there's efficiency and there's scope. And I think the iron triangle, as taught by Project Management Institute and others, is total hogwash. It is not true. You can change any of these simultaneously in a good direction if you understand design and finding a design that has better cost, better time, and better scope. That's the bottom line of that. And we'll move on. I've tried to make a list of the types of people you might need in doing this. Here's the value designer. And you need to train people to design for value and cost. And you need to train people to do these things. And you don't train them on a 2-day certification course either. Okay. And here's sort of almost the last slide. Here is the automated tool, ValPlan. There's the author of the tool. One of my students at a bank in London, Richard Smith, did a magnificent job. And that was the key to Gary's work, is having a good automation tool to keep track of all the detail of an emerging complex system. I personally wouldn't work any other way, but most people are still at the yellow sticky stage. And hey guys, there's something called digitization of project management of value. Okay, here are the principles of success. I'll just highlight one. We need to look at the multiple costs, including the future technical debt costs, not just the capital costs and the deadline costs. Okay, so here, summary, all I wanted to say: quantify critical stakeholder values, manage towards value goals frequently until project done. How many of your projects actually do this? Show me. I'm from Missouri. And I hope I've taught you some how, some practical methods that have been tried out for decades by well-known companies successfully. And maybe these methods seemed like too much trouble up to now. But if you and your management is tired of not delivering the benefits on time, under budget, if you're in the 99.5% that fails to do this, maybe you'll consider taking the time and trouble to learn some new ideas, to practice some new ideas, one at a time. Don't do everything at once, and see if you don't get some better results. And with that, 1 minute before the end is my last slide. There's another chance to get all the slides with the QR, and I'm ready for your questions and discussion.
Thank you very much, Tom. And I'm going to take back the presentation here for a minute. And with that, I'm going to go to the questions. One of the questions we had was, could I give a pointer? Tom mentioned his previous webinars that he has done for us, and he has requested that I post all of these out on YouTube so you can all see them. He's done 4 previous webinars for us. This one will be posted both on softwareexcellenceacademy.com for 8 weeks, but we're also putting them out on our YouTube channel, my YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/@Linda Westfall 408. Just search for Linda Westfall and look for my picture. You will notice that I recently posted all of the ones he's previously done. This new one will be posted shortly. So that's where you can find them. Somebody asked where we could find these. Going to questions. Maru says, I think EVO is actually the very first known agile method. Is that correct, Tom?
Just checking. Can you hear my voice now?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay, just had to check it. Well, in my book, Principles of Software Engineering Management, 1988, I have a whole chapter 15, which I will send on request to anybody who requests it, giving the history of agile methods that weren't called agile or evo. So the answer is, in many academics doing research on agile have credited my evo as being the first published one for IT and software. That is true. Nobody seems to have prior claim. I actually described it in my software metrics book, 1976, page 214. So I have an early published claim. But people were doing it, incremental, feedback-driven delivery, in all manner of things for all manner of time. So, so the only claim I can make is early publishing for IT business.
Yeah, I agree with that. I always said I was doing Agile long before Agile was cool. I mean, I worked for
Yeah,
small companies almost my whole career, and we did everything in small increments. And we did planning on a weekly/bi-weekly basis. And we talked to each other all the time because we just yelled across the cubicle barrier.
Right. So, yeah. But you maybe you didn't copyright it early enough, Linda. I beat you to it.
Yeah. No, I'm just saying that's just the way we worked back then in small companies.
Yeah, of course. Of course.
You know, I love the Agile manifesto that says we're inventing new ways of doing things. And I'm sitting here going,
Oh, wow.
and which of these is new? Because
Yeah.
I was doing them back in the early 80s.
Right.
But
It was natural for programmers to do that, especially when we could put in one changed instruction at a time and see what happened, as opposed to
absolutely.
compiling the whole thing. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I compiled and tested my stuff sometimes hourly, let alone
Right.
daily, weekly, monthly.
Right.
But anyway, that I just always kind of chuckle a little bit at how quote unquote new this is. We actually have no other questions in the questionnaire at this point. I think you've explained things very well with good examples, Tom. So with nothing else to add, thank you very much, Tom, again for an excellent presentation with lots of facts, information, and thought-provoking ideas. And I'll hopefully see most of you next Wednesday. Talk to you then. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you all.